Yeah, so I think there's kind of two sides of that as well. It's the part where the program is just difficult and competitive, no matter who you are, no matter if you are like the most aligned with what people stereotype a fighter pilot to be, you're still going to struggle because they are feeding you so much information so fast. It's drinking from a fire hose. That's to be expected. But as far as the stuff we've kind of talked about with my personality and, in pilot training, I was the only woman in my class of 25 people. And when I was in ROTC and set that as my goal, I just knew it was what I wanted. And I was aware that not a lot of women were fighter pilots, but I didn't know what the numbers were. And I didn't really, it was a very fleeting thought. It was like, yep, cool, acknowledged, next, I'm doing this.
So, Michelle Mace Curran, combat veteran, former F-16 fighter pilot, lead solo pilot for the Air Force Thunderbirds, which is something I really want to talk about, and now author and national speaker. Welcome to the program. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you nailed the byline. I know it's a mouthful.
Well, it's interesting because I have a connection to that, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But um, locally here, there's a group called the 180th Fighter Wing Group, and I do have a connection with them in here in my hometown in Toledo. And I do a lot of coaching of young people as it relates to career choice. And one of the things that I always ask the pilots here at the local 180th is what formulated or what happened in your childhood, or was there something that happened in your childhood that could have led you towards a military path, and certainly towards a pilot in the military path?
Yeah, so I did not grow up in a military family per se. Like my grandpa had been in World War II, but he had passed away when I was about 2 years old, so I don't have any memory of him. And there weren't any bases nearby. I was in northern Wisconsin, small town, and I wasn't in an aviation family either. So I don't know that the seeds got planted that early, but once I was in the military and we started to look back, there were a few things that popped out. So my grandpa had this metal trunk from World War II that said Lieutenant Curran on the side, and inside of it were these photos from the Pacific, were his pipe, his glasses, his uniforms, his letters
Wow.
he had written to my grandma, and I was obsessed with opening that up, pulling all that stuff out, trying on his uniform. Just it felt
Really?
I love adventure. I was a kid that was dreaming about traveling the world and doing exciting things, and that felt, coming from this small town in Wisconsin of about 4,000 people, this trunk felt like the magic cupboard that I could open and explore this part of the world and this
Yeah.
adventure that seemed so far away from what I was growing up in. So there's that. And then my mom sent me a photo a few years ago. She was digging through their house and had found some of my old art projects. And there is a clay F-16. I mean, I didn't know it was an F-16 when I made it, but there is a single tail, single engine fighter jet with a clay afterburner flame coming out the back of it that I made in like sixth grade.
Wow.
I don't remember that. Like when she sent me a picture, I was like, oh, that vaguely looks familiar. But I did not grow up thinking I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I had a lot of other aspirations. I went through a phase of wanting to be an archaeologist after I was a big fan of Jurassic Park. And then I
Sure.
wanted to be a marine biologist and eventually an FBI agent. And I went to college on an ROTC scholarship because I needed a way to pay for school. That was primarily the motivation. But I went as a criminal justice major because I still had plans to do 4 years in the Air Force to pay back my scholarship, probably doing something like special investigations. And then I was going to get out and apply to the FBI Academy. So that was kind of the plan. And I think I was drawn, there's a lot of scholarship opportunities, there's a lot of ways to pay for college. I think I was drawn to the military because I did see it as something challenging and exciting and a way to see the world and just something that would open a lot of opportunities for me. But as far as actually flying, the inspirational moment for that didn't come until about halfway through my college time in ROTC when we visited a base down in Florida. And I was always kind of intrigued by the aviation part, but I had never been the cadet that was, raising my hand, being like, I want to be a pilot. I want to be a pilot. It was something I was pondering, but I still thought special investigations, FBI. Then we're visiting this base, and a two ship of F-15s take off in full afterburner at dusk. And I'm just like, holy crap, goosebumps.
Top
Like
Gun style, right? I mean,
yeah.
original Top Gun style, right?
And we're right there. We're on the ramp. So we are right there watching them take off. You know, it's deafening, it vibrates your whole body. And it was just this exciting feeling that I'd never really experienced before. And I was like, I need to go figure out how to do that. Like, FBI, cool, but I'm already in Air Force ROTC. Let me see if I can get a pilot slot. And not just that, but I want to be a fighter pilot. So saying that and then actually doing it, two different things.
Yeah. Well,
But
it's
that was
interesting
the moment.
because my next two questions were what were you looking to get out of the military? And
Yeah.
it sounds to me like it was at least a way to pay for your college at the time, and not necessarily, you weren't thinking, although you have some cool childhood history to it that we just discovered, but you weren't necessarily thinking, I'm going to go be a military person. It was a way to get your school taken care of for your criminology, in other words.
Yeah. And I think it's really noble when people at 17, 18 years old are like, I want to serve my country, be part of something bigger. I want to
Absolutely.
spend 20 years. That just wasn't the case for me at that age. You know, I saw it as a means to an end initially, but obviously I stuck around for over 13 years. So that evolved over time. Um, but it's interesting because I think if you talk to different people in the military, you will find all different reasons and paths that people took to get into the organization. But it's really cool because it's a diverse group, but they work so well together towards a common mission. And it doesn't really matter if you wanted to be a fighter pilot since you were 5 years old, or if you figured that out when you were 20, you can end up in the same spot and you can end up playing on the same team.
Well, that's the one thing that I find really interesting because hanging around these pilots locally, you learn that some of them, they just liked flying their own personal, planes for hobbies, and then they found a way to get into that organization and just keep going. Some of them not always when they're younger. Some of them in their late 20s or whatever. I mean, they just found ways to get in, and to your point, they came from all different directions. So, were were you surprised because we're going to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and some of the other things that you overcame in in your career so far. Were you surprised by the fact that you yourself got to the point where you're like, yeah, I'm going to go fly this $40 million thing? I mean, were you surprised at that?
I feel like I have almost two sides to my personality that are always competing. And the one side, I was really awkward and shy as a kid. Like I would never put myself out there. I wouldn't raise my hand in class. I never wanted to be put on the spot. I didn't want to lead anything. But then the other side, I was an overachiever in the fact that I pursued getting straight A's and I wanted to be good at things and I wanted those accolades of like, you're doing a good job, good for you. And sometimes those things went hand in hand, like being a good student didn't necessarily, like my shyness didn't impact that. But as you get
Sure.
into something like the military, you have to be out in front of people, especially like in ROTC, they're expecting you to lead. They're expecting you to get up in front of the cadet wing and speak and give commands and put yourself outside your comfort zone. And it felt exactly like that. It felt super uncomfortable for a lot of the time. But throughout that time, I was growing and I was learning, and my tolerance for what was uncomfortable was definitely increasing. So I had this really high drive towards this goal of becoming a fighter pilot to the point where I would, when I was in ROTC, once I had decided that, and I knew physical fitness was a big factor for determining kind of your ranking in the cadet wing. And in my mind, I didn't want to be fit for a girl. I wanted to be like one of the fittest people in my class. So I would
Love it.
strive to beat the guys in the run,
Love
in the
it.
push ups, whatever it was. And that was hard. Like I was not an athlete growing up. So there was a lot that had to happen to make that happen. And I would visualize when the physical pain was tough, when I'm running, trying to max out my PT test and I'm like tasting copper in my mouth, when you
Right.
run that hard,
Sure. Yeah.
I would visualize this fighter jet that I was going to go fly like in front of me. I was like a dog on a racetrack chasing the rabbit, visualizing this thing in front of me. And it just allowed me to push myself. And so, in that regard, I knew what I wanted and I was willing to go as hard as I could, sprint towards it. But I also felt like my natural personality didn't align with that world and the stereotypes from that world.
Right.
And when I was chasing the goal of just getting a fighter jet, going to pilot training, doing well enough to get one of the few that are available at the end of that time, I was able to kind of set that aside because I was so goal focused. Once I got in the job, now the goals become a little bit more ambiguous once you're in the world, and it becomes very apparent that you are different than the people around you. And that's when the imposter syndrome, when like the more reserved, shy side of my personality, I just started to realize that there was some disconnect about kind of my natural personality versus how I felt I had to show up in that
Well,
environment.
let's talk about that. First off, I can imagine at your high school reunion when people find out that you were flying, planes at 600 miles an hour, inches away, upside down from other planes. They're going to go, wait a minute, Michelle, you're talking about, you're talking about the same girl,
Right.
based on the fact that you were shy in high school. So I can't wait, I guess, for your high school reunion, so I can hear the stories about how that went. Um, but I think this is an important point because as you were going through this training, like just from who you are, what obstacles did you face to from people saying, well, she's not going to do this, or she can't do this, or like what kind of obstacles did you face? And you know how much, because we've talked before. In fact, the last time
Yeah.
we talked for an hour, and we should have recorded that as well. But
Right.
we talked about how much vision is so important in every one of our daily lives as far as how it leads us. Talk about the obstacles that you face to even becoming a pilot or even being accepted, I guess, in that world.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two sides of that as well. It's the part where the program is just difficult and competitive, no matter who you are, no matter if you are like the most aligned with what people stereotype a fighter pilot to be, you're still going to struggle because they are feeding you so much information so fast. It's drinking from a fire hose. That's to be expected. But as far as the stuff we've kind of talked about with my personality and, in pilot training, I was the only woman in my class of 25 people. And when I was in ROTC and set that as my goal, I just knew it was what I wanted. And I was aware that not a lot of women were fighter pilots, but I didn't know what the numbers were. And I didn't really, it was a very fleeting thought. It was like, yep, cool, acknowledged, next, I'm doing this.
Right, right.
Once
Love
I
that.
got there, it becomes something that's highlighted to you all the time. And sometimes that's in a positive way. A lot of times it's in a positive way where it's like, oh, it's so cool that you're doing this. Or, some of the guys in my class, their wives would be like, it's so awesome that you're doing this. Like, you make
Yeah,
me
for
so
sure.
proud.
Yeah.
Um, and that feels good. That feels nice to be singled out in that way. But you can't really have one without the other because the other side of it is you really just want to do your best in that program, get through it, get the aircraft that you wanted because you did well in the program, not because of any other factor. And so a few things started to happen that kind of made it apparent to me that everyone else was very aware that I was different than them as well. And there was, one of my really good friends in the class, he was talking to someone from another class, another guy. And we were out in a social environment, like on a Friday night, and I could overhear them. And the guy from the other class is like, oh, what's it like to have a chick in your class? Because they had all guys. And my friend was like, luckily she's really cool, but it could be a huge pain in the ass.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
what do I at that moment I kind of was just like, oh good, I'm glad I'm one of the guys and I fit in. Those little things like that, they highlight that you have a standard to not make waves. You have a standard to conform, to be like everyone else, and that might mean not showing up authentically as who you really are. And I'm not talking about breaking standards or breaking rules, just the parts of your personality that are
Right.
inherent, you kind of push to the side to fit into the crowd. So, I mean, that I was not offended by that. It's just one of those interesting remarks that you think about how you reacted in the moment, But then you also think about the impact of those kind of remarks over time, and they do affect you. It's kind of like death by a thousand paper cuts. And then there was I guess, a more blatant one later on where I knew I was doing well. I was on the track for fighters, bombers, which happens about halfway through the program. You have to be in the top 50% of your class. And in our class of 25, only 6 people went into that pool where you even had potential to be a fighter pilot. So that's like the first big chop that happens.
Yeah,
And I
that's
make it into that group of 6.
wow.
So we're like, okay, we're on the right track. Now we are flying a jet trainer, the T-38, which is like what NASA trains their astronauts in. They're still flying today.
Is that like a simulator or a real plane or?
And actually, it's a jet fighter trainer essentially.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So now we're flying that instead of a prop airplane that we've been learning in for the first 6 months. And a big portion of how you are rated in your class, because everything comes down to class ranking. When the squadron gets the list of aircraft available for your class, it's going to have probably a couple fighter jets, a lot of heavy aircraft, maybe a bomber or two, maybe like one helicopter's in there. Generally, anywhere from 1 to 3 fighter aircraft is what we were seeing at that time. Then they take and they look at the class ranking and they take the top person in the class and they're like, cool, what did they list as their first preference of aircraft on what we call their dream sheet?
Okay.
And they try to match up people. It's this giant puzzle. So the higher you are in your class, the odds are obviously way more favorable that you're going to get the aircraft you want. So I knew I was probably neck and neck for second or third in the class. The guy that was first had just crushed it. We all knew he was first. So that was fine. Coming down to a last check ride, I am studying, because we would work together all the time. I am studying with the guy that's also neck and neck for second and third. And we've been training together for a year at that point. We're friends. And he was getting frustrated. He was feeling overwhelmed and stressed because his check ride was the next day. And at one point, he kind of I think he got an answer wrong because we were quizzing each other. And he was just like, I don't even know why I'm wasting my time. They're going to give you a fighter jet to check the box.
Ooh.
And that was kind of the first time ever through my 4 years of ROTC, through the year plus I had been a lieutenant at that point, that anyone had said anything like that right to my face.
Right.
And so it was a gut punch, but I also didn't defend myself at all. I just kind of was like, sure. And then we went on studying. If it was me today, I would have had a few different things to say to him.
Right.
But
Exactly.
at that point, I'm all about not making waves. I'm all about conforming as much as possible.
Well, so I saw that you had an interview, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but you had an interview on the Kelly Clarkson show,
Yeah.
and you had a 7-year-old girl who was there with you, and I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming she wanted to meet you for sure because she was so excited to meet you. But what advice would you not only have given to her, but what advice would you give any young woman today who wants to say, hey, if she can do it? Because you have to understand that what I love most about your story is the fact that you are an amazing role model, right? You're an amazing role model that tenacity gets it done, persistence gets it done, resilience gets it done, no matter what you're, man, woman, or whatever. But you do have a pretty good pulpit based on what you've done. What advice do you give to young women that want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think this is actually a great time to ask that question because I don't think I did it perfectly. I think I spent way too much time and energy worried about what other people thought of me. And think I definitely had the spotlight effect going, where I thought everyone was watching my every move and I was under a microscope. And I was to some extent, but not nearly at the level I perceived to be,
Okay.
where
Okay.
I felt
Gotcha.
like I had to walk on eggshells and do everything perfectly and laugh at every joke the right way and also perform in the aircraft. And so, what I tell women now, especially if you're going into a career where you are a very small minority of the group around you, focus on just being the best you can possibly be at your job, right? Because like getting that fighter aircraft out of pilot training, I ended up being second in the class and there were only 2 available. And my friend that had made that comment went on to fly heavy aircraft, which also is great for different reasons, but that wasn't what he wanted at the time.
Sure.
And the reason I was second in my class is because that last check ride that we had, I crushed it. I know I crushed it. Like the flight went amazing. It was one of my best flights of the entire program. And I think a lot of organizations in the military for sure works really hard to make it a meritocracy, to base people's, performance reports and feedback and everything on how they actually technically execute the job and their proficiency level. And that is something you can control. You can't control other people's bias. You can't control the comments that people are going to make. You can stand up for yourself in a professional way, but the biggest thing you can control is your own performance, your own response to things, your own preparation. And so that's what I tell, I mean, this advice goes for men and women, right?
Sure, of course.
That's what I tell women. Stop letting the noise drain your energy. Focus on being good at your job. And when you show up and you just crush it, the respect will come.
Well, that is such a good point, and it's one that I wanted to make because I'm a kind of a blue collar advocate, right? Um, there's so many people out there that think they have to send their kids to get expensive college degrees in order for them to be successful, and we know that's not true. Um, and we know that supply and demand works in people's favor, especially where supply is low and demand is high. That's where the money goes. And even in jobs like being a carpenter or a welder or an electrician, um, I have to tell you, I've talked to a lot of women who are welders, and people would say, they're way more patient, they're way more detailed, they're actually better welders than men are. And so I just love, I love the fact of this conversation because I'm a big believer in taking advantage of supply and demand. Okay. I'm wherever you can do that, you should do that. And when I see some of these gals that are out there, making six figures as a welder or making beyond that as a owning a plumber shop or being a carpenter or having an electrician shop. I have a friend, a gal who is she owns a dump truck company. She's got like 15 dump trucks and moves gravel and stone all over Northwest Ohio. And I just absolutely love that because here they are, they're fearless. Like you said, you're going into a world where you're in a spotlight, but yet you're taking advantage of what other people aren't willing to do anymore because again the demand is starting to dwindle with those positions. And I just love the fact that they're infilling these positions and creating amazing lives for themselves. I've got a picture of a gal who is a welder who's standing on top of a 300-foot tall windmill, those huge windmills,
Yeah.
electricity generating windmills, and she's taking pictures of herself and she's making 175,000 a year. She's 27 years old. So
Awesome.
I just love this whole conversation. And that's why I thought it was important to ask about what advice you would give to other gals, because, you know, get into these positions. Don't be afraid. Take these things on and
Yep.
you can make an amazing life for yourself, right?
For sure. And I think if you can find the courage to, sorry, there's construction going on outside my house.
I can't hear a thing. You're good.
Speaking of that, cool, we'll forge ahead. It's right on brand, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you can find the courage to put yourself in those positions and go after them, I do think there is something there with when you are one of very few, you do feel that pressure to perform. And so you aren't, there's no entitlement, right? There's no
Right.
feeling like I'm just going to coast on my name or the expectations or whatever. I am going to make sure I put in the work. I'm going to make sure I'm very prepared. And so I have people say that this with female pilots as well. They're like, all the women I've worked with, they're always so ready for their flight. They've done the work. They never show up and expect to just like wing it and have it go well because they know that they have to prove themselves to some degree. And I don't want people to feel like they have to prove themselves. Like that was a big obstacle that I struggled with. But there is something there that makes you perform to some degree at a higher level.
So eh, I couldn't agree more. And again, if there's a message out there, it is use the fact that you might be unexpected in that arena to just go kill it. I mean,
Yeah.
just to take
Watch
so
me.
much advantage of it. Like, watch me do this. The
Yes.
the gal that owns these dump trucks, I don't think she's 5 feet tall and 100 pounds. And I just love her because she shows up and she's like, bring it in. She's directing all these trucks to go all these, and she's got her hard hat on and she owns her own company and she's loving it. And
Awesome.
she's taking advantage of an opportunity that she came upon. So all right, so let's get back to the plane for a second. So we talked last time. I am the honorary commander of the 180th Fighter Wing Group here in
Yeah.
Toledo, the Stingers, as they call them. And I got the chance to fly in the second seat of an F-16. And the most crazy and amazing experience. I had to train for 4 hours in the morning before I could get in the seat. And, the training kind of reminded me of when you sign up to bungee jump. You can
Mhm.
die this way, you can die this way, you can die this way.
Yeah.
All the
Sign
things
this
that,
form.
yeah, all the things you have to be very careful about. I had to learn how to cut parachute strings in case my parachute got tied up.
Yep.
Was I hoping to not use the parachute? Of course I was. I had to learn how to get this kit that if I ejected out of the ejector seat, there's this whole kit that is a survival kit that has a knife and a compass and a flashlight and food and a raft and all these things.
Oh
And
yeah.
man, am I glad I don't have to, or I'm hoping I don't ever have to use this particular piece of training. And then there was the seat that I didn't get in, but they showed me the seat where they spin you around upside down and try to, I guess, emulate some type of G-force or whatever. And I remember the pilot saying, I've been through a lot of tough things in my life, but getting in that seat and having them just spin you around at all these crazy gyrations, and many of them failed it 2 3 times before they could get out and work through that. Did you have to go through that, and what fun was that like for you?
Yeah. So I think you're talking about the centrifuge training. Was it the room with the capsule on the end of the arm
Yes,
that spins? Okay.
yes,
Yeah. So
exactly.
that is a torture device, I swear. You have to go through it a couple times if you end up flying like 9G aircraft, which is what the F-16 is, pull 9 times the force of gravity. So when you make that first cut to the fighter bomber track where you start flying those jet trainers, the T-38, that's the first time you make a trip to the centrifuge. And you pull up to 7.5 Gs on that trip because that's what that aircraft can pull. So you're already like, that was not fun. And then you leave, you go fly the T-38. And then if you're lucky and you get a fighter, you come back 6 months later. And now if you're going to the F-16, you get to do the 9G profile. And I will say that between 7 and 9 Gs, it is exponentially worse. I think like a resting tolerance of, we'll say like five Gs, so 5 times the force of gravity. So whatever people weigh, just multiply that by five. That's how heavy you feel you are. 5 Gs is uncomfortable, but most people will stay awake successfully through 5 Gs. As you get closer to seven, most people will G lock, which is a G induced loss of consciousness, where the blood gets pushed out of your head. You pass out essentially from that. And there's a G suit, this thing on your lower body that squeezes your legs to kind of push the blood back up. I always say it's like a giant blood pressure cuff. It inflates with air, and you're a tube of toothpaste, and your blood is the toothpaste being pushed around inside of you.
Right,
So that helps push it back up. So that helps that tolerance. And then part of the training that you went through before your flight was to learn to G strain, which is where you flex your lower body muscles to kind of double what the suit does. And
right,
then you do this unique breathing to keep pressure in your chest cavity and air in your lungs. Because if you breathe out under 9 Gs for sure, but even under 7 Gs, if you exhale all the way, your lungs aren't strong enough to reinflate. So now you just have however long you can hold your breath with no air in your lungs, which is not very long for most of us. So there's all these things you're trained to do to help with that. But if you aren't doing any of that, you're just sitting there, you're probably going night night around 5 to 6 Gs.
well, I have to tell you, I was very proud of myself because we went up and we broke the speed of sound, which was super cool. Although for the people in the plane, it's not as cool as the people hearing
Yeah.
it on the ground. It's just like a little shimmy in the plane, okay? And you know that obviously. And we did some loops, and I was able to do some loops, and I was able to do some barrel rolls. I was actually able to fly the plane, which was ridiculously cool. I have to tell you, in the barrel rolls, I had to stare at that little globe in the middle
Oh
because
yeah.
that, to me, it was the only way I knew that I was right side up again. Um, but now it was time for the G's, and I had the suit on, and it was squeezing my legs. And we did two, and then we did three, and then we did four. And then he worked his way up into five, and he goes, "Okay, this thing will do 7. How you feeling? And I was sucking on the 100% oxygen at that point,
Yeah.
but I was still feeling pretty good. So I said, all right, let's just push this a little bit more. So I got to 6.5 without passing out. But I have to tell you, my arms, I couldn't lift my arms. Like I
Yep.
remember looking sideways going, why can't I lift my arms? And it was the most amazing experience to know that that's what you guys go through, and then to say there's still 30% more that
Yeah.
I could have experienced. I mean, have you ever done 9? And if so, what is that even like?
Oh yeah. Every single air show I ever flew with the Thunderbirds, I would hit 9, if not high 8s, just based on the maneuvers I flew. So since we're this is funny because in a normal F-16 squadron, you have a couple blocks of training because you kind of do phase training. Usually, like you'll spend a few weeks focused on close air support, supporting the guys on the ground from your aircraft. You'll do a couple like air to air, or it's like we're entering another country and they have bad guys, and how are we going to handle that with all these different jets? And then there's one phase that's called BFM, which is basic fighter maneuvering, what everyone in layman's terms knows as dogfighting.
Okay.
And that is really the only time in a normal squadron that you're pulling 9Gs. All of the other tactics and missions, you don't need that. You might pull 7 if like you're turning around really quickly or something. But 9 is kind of reserved for the air to air fighting. And so you'll do it. And when you're in those phases, you might do it a few times a week. And then you might go, several weeks before you do it again. Go to the Thunderbirds and being one of the solo pilots. So for anyone that's seen the show, you have the 6 jets, and the 2 jets on the far left and far right are the solos, and we split off. We do the head-on passes that look like a game of chicken. We do the single jet maneuvers. It's really to show the crowd what the F-16 is capable of, which means you fly the aircraft at the edges of its flight capabilities on a regular
Right.
basis.
Right.
So I pulled 9Gs. I mean, sometimes during training season we would fly 10 times a week, and I was hitting it 1 or 2 times during every flight, and then hitting 7 to 8 several other times during every flight. And I did that for 3 years. Normally only
Wow.
do it for 2, but because of the pandemic we got asked to stay for a third year. So I don't really want this bragging right, but I have pulled a 9Gs more than most F-16 pilots, I would say.
Right.
um it is one of those things you get used to some degree.
Okay.
You know what to expect. Your body does adapt to it somewhat. So when you're doing it on a regular basis, your natural resting G tolerance goes up.
Okay.
And it's actually really noticeable if you take like a week off for, say, the squadron's shut down for Christmas or something. You haven't flown in a week or 10 days. You come back that first flight, you go to pull 9Gs and you are G straining really hard. You still will get a little bit of gray out in your vision, and you're fighting for it. Or you've been flying 10 times that week and you can pull 9Gs and you're still G straining at 9 always, but you're not getting gray out. It's feels much more doable,
Yeah.
but it never feels good. It always is uncomfortable, bordering on painful. If you haven't done it in a while, another physical adaptation that you get is that it doesn't really hurt, but when you haven't done it for a while, you will get blood pooling in your elbows. And so I don't know if you experienced this. You probably didn't at 6.5, but if you had gone up to like 7 to 8, you would have. Your arms are, when you're flying, you have the stick and the throttle, and it's a side stick. So your right arm has the stick, it's kind of bent at 90 degrees.
Sure.
Your left arm is the same on the throttle. So the low points when you're thinking about gravity and blood are your elbows. And when you haven't flown in a while, you haven't pulled G's in a while, when you crank up to 7 to 9, you can feel it happening. You get what we call G's, which is just a play off of measles.
Sure.
Measles, where you break all the little blood vessels and you actually end up with all these red dots all over your skin because of broken blood vessels, and it hurts when you're doing it. But when you're doing it all the time, that doesn't happen anymore. So I don't
Okay.
know what's going on inside our bodies, but it's pretty cool that we can adapt. That was a long answer. 9G sucks. I'll be happy to never do it again. But it is like a rite of passage. Everyone wants to experience it, but I promise you it's not that fun.
Well, I can tell you, 6.5 was not that fun.
Yeah.
Um, I do remember the gray out because I was thinking, did the sun just go into a cloud or am I experiencing something weird here? And the whole time I'm like you said, I'm clamping down in this seat. The suit is blowing up and trying to keep. And I remember switching from regular oxygen to 100%. Like, give me some more of that. And and it was just such an amazing experience. And here's the thing. So I'm nervous and I'm not flying the thing. Okay. 2 weeks up to my flight, people were asking me, you know, how you doing? How you feeling? Are you scared or whatever? You get enough of that, you're like, okay, well, yeah, I'm all right. I'm just gonna go make this happen.
Yep.
Luckily, 2 months earlier, I jumped out of an airplane with another Navy SEAL, and we were parachuting. So I was like, I was in mode to just give it to the gods and let what happens happen, right? Um, but here you are. There is at one point where you're getting into that F-16 by yourself, okay?
Yep.
And you're taking off, and I'm assuming taking off, because I've done it, is a hell of a lot easier than, okay, now I have to land this thing
Yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
and get my feet on the ground. Can you describe the first time that you were flying and by yourself, and then when you had to land this thing, like, holy cow, I can't, like, there's no tolerance for error here, and how that worked?
Yeah, I think all of those kind of moments, the first F-16 solo, just various, like, in hindsight, where they're pinch me moments where you should be like, holy crap, I've made it. But when you're in it, you're just so focused on the checklist and the task at hand and what you should do next and what you should say on the radio. And there's never any downtime on those flights. There, especially when you're younger and you're new because your brain's not that fast yet.
Right.
So you feel like your hours just barely keeping up with the pace of the aircraft. And so there really was no moment where I was like celebrating that I was flying an F-16 by myself. There was more nerves and then just focus on stay on the task at hand. What's the checklist say? What do I do next? What's the next check that I'm doing? Who am I talking to next? Just to, if you let your brain wander at all when you're really inexperienced, you've missed something.
Yeah.
I think it was after I landed where there was more like the celebration type feeling.
Right.
But I think surreal though is honestly the word that it's a surreal experience.
Yeah, I guarantee you, one of the things I remember even going up in the air was, I think we were at 0 to 100 in like 1 second or whatever it was. But
Yeah.
I remember going straight up, and then I remember we were turning to the right, and I looked down and I saw a city, and I said, "Is that Bowling Green?" And he said, "No, that's Columbus." Now, just so you know, Bowling Green is 10 minutes away from us. Columbus is 2 hours. So we were over Columbus so fast. I
Yeah.
just couldn't believe it that we had gone that far. And then we were able to go down into the valleys in Chillicothe and zoom around there at lower altitude, which was amazing. Because then you get a sense for how fast you're really flying. But
Yes, for
I
sure.
just, when I think of you, in your first landing, and, you've done all this training and you've gone through all these, I don't know if you want to call them stigmas or biases or whatever you've had to overcome. And now here you are landing this thing. That had to be pretty cool to say, okay, I'm there. I did it. I made it, right?
For sure. And I tried to take those moments to be like, heck yeah. But I think I'm better at this now because I force myself to be. But I was like, okay, what's the next thing I need to achieve? And that worked for a while. It made me good at what I did, but it also stressed me out and burned me out eventually.
Right.
Um, and so now doing what I do, with my business and stuff, I'm like, okay, we're going to celebrate all of those small wins that happen, even though there's bigger wins we're chasing. Like, we're going to celebrate those small ones because, I mean, that's the whole reason you're doing it. Like, if you can't enjoy it and celebrate occasionally, like, why are you even doing it? But at the time, I was very mission focused, we'll call it.
Yeah. And you went from, so you had your career in the military, you had your career as a F-16 pilot, then you jumped into the Thunderbirds, and you did that for a number of years. And I've seen some of the photos. It must have been cool to be on the ground and those younger kids wanting your autograph and that kind of thing, because you are a unique and special person, to do what you're doing. Man or woman, doesn't matter. I mean, you're a rock star when you're in that world of flying those planes and doing those great things, and the acrobatics and all that. And then you decide, okay, I'm done with that, and I'm going to go into the business world. So, how did you transition from that world into what you're doing today?
So I left active duty after the Thunderbirds at about the 13-year point, and that was unexpected for a lot of people because for sure the majority, but not everyone. A lot of people stay in, right? A lot of people will go till 20, you get a full retirement. That's considered, a complete military career if you want to look at it that way. And the Thunderbirds does set you up to have a successful remainder of your career, right? Most people will go to school and get a master's degree through the Air Force, and then they'll go be a director of operations, which is second in command of a squadron, and then they'll become a commander of a squadron. So it definitely puts you on that track. But what you mentioned about having those interactions with people on the ground, at first I found those fairly stressful because of being more introverted,
Sure.
and sometimes they were awkward, and I didn't have a hip pocket full of small talk to make those less awkward. And so I kind of relied on how socially skilled the person coming up to me was, which sometimes worked great and sometimes did not work great.
Sure.
Um, but through practice and just exposure to it, I got more comfortable with it. Eventually, you do that for 3 years, you get to the point where you can have a great conversation with anyone. And even if they're socially awkward, you can carry it and you can end it without it feeling weird to people and all the things. But I had all these moments where little girls stick out in my memory because they felt so connected to me because they were seeing someone that looked like them doing something that seems like a superhero.
Sure.
But those interactions happened with all ages, with men, with women. Like it wasn't just little girls. But the number of times that a parent would drag their daughter up to the front of the autograph line and be like, look, she just flew that jet. She was the one that was upside down. And you could see the wheels turn. I'm talking like 6 to 7, 8-year-old kids. You could see the wheels turn. And then it was like a light bulb went on and their eyes would just light up and they would just start asking questions. And they would be like, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to do that someday. And it was like watching what they saw as possible for them in the world expand in front of your eyes. And to do that for someone was the coolest thing I've ever done. It became way cooler than the flying part. And I also started to grow an audience on social media, which really that started as just wanting to share these really amazing cockpit videos that we had the cameras, we were allowed to do it at that time.
Yeah.
And it was just really cool to give people this behind the scenes pilot's view of these insane maneuvers. And I really had no intention of doing anything with that. It was just like, this is fun to connect with people. During the pandemic, when everyone's stuck at home, it really grew and became a thing because people were just desperate for that connection. The air shows were canceled, so all the aviation enthusiasts were turning to online content.
Sure.
We did the America Strong flyovers where
Nice.
we joined the Blue Angels and we flew over a lot of major cities in the US in the heart of the pandemic. And so we just connected with this big audience. So I'm on my last year with the Thunderbirds, and I knew I wanted to get out, but I kind of thought I would go fly for the airlines. That's what everyone does.
That's what
Right?
everybody does. Yep.
The natural
Absolutely.
transition. That's the expectation. Either you stay in or you go fly for the airlines. Those are kind of like the two choices that people make generally.
Right.
I had started to get asked to speak at events while I was still on active duty, and I just couldn't ever do it schedule wise, and you can't be paid to do it at that point. So I could never say yes. I'm, towards the end of my last season with the team, I'm considering going to get my requirements for the airlines finished off. I'm looking at going to do like drone sales with a tech startup, all these things. And a private school reached out and asked for me to speak the following spring. And it was far enough out that it would be after I was out of the Air Force. And that was kind of the thing that planted this seed of what had been kind of curiosity if it was something I could do occasionally. To be like, let me actually dig into this, because they're like, what are your speaking rates? What do you talk on?
Right.
And I'm like, I have no idea.
Let's figure that out.
Yeah, let's figure that out. So as I figured that out, I realized how good it felt to tell my story in a way that was just me authentically speaking vulnerably, not following anyone's talking points, not following anyone else's expectations,
Sure.
just being
Not
like,
having
what
a speech writer. Yeah, exactly.
what can I take from my background, from the highs, the lows, to inspire these kids? Like, what things are they going to experience? Feelings of doubt, of imposter syndrome, of fear of failure, all these things we all experience. I want to convey to them that even me, who did this thing that seems again like a superhero, experienced those exact same things. Because I think when they realize that, and it feels relatable, it makes their big goals seem more achievable. And so I wrote the speech, went and gave it. I was terrified, but I started to explore the speaking industry, and I told my husband, I was like, I'm going to stop these other conversations with the tech company, looking at the airlines. I'm like, I'm going to see if I can do this full time. And I think he was a little bit like, do you see what they're getting paid to fly for the airlines? Have you seen their
Right.
matching rates? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, but I was like, just trust me. Let's do this. First year went well. Second year, I doubled my business, and we're doing great again on year three. So we're a little bit past 2.5 years at this point of doing it. I published two children's books since then. I have a personal development book that I wish I could share all the details on, but we'll get there in a couple of months. That'll be out next year. Um, I'm doing some coaching, but I'm on, 40-ish stages a year. And the feedback has been incredible. The
Well,
Yeah, it's
y-
amazing.
yeah. So I think the coolest part of this whole conversation, I mean, obviously flying the planes is cool. I mean, that is
For
all
sure.
good. And only because I was able to do it, do I even 1% relate to what you've done. But when I think of the person that you describe yourself earlier as this
Mhm.
shy person in class, and you wanted to achieve good, but you can get straight A's and be quiet about it. Nobody really knows. I mean, so you could probably still be introverted and do
Yeah.
great that way. But when I think of where you were in that high school setting and how you describe yourself, and then fast forward to you giving speeches, you know, where you get paid decent, paid well, and now you're doing this across the country. I mean, could you ever have imagined the bridge from one of those to the
No.
next?
No. And I during a lot of Q&As on stage, I will tell the story because a lot of people in the audience identify as introverted, right?
Sure.
And so when they hear me share that part, they're like, "Oh, she's speaking to me." And they'll,
Yeah.
if they have the courage to stand up and raise their hand, which a lot of times they don't, but if they do, they'll be like, "How how the heck did you become comfortable as a speaker? Like I just can't put." They're like, "You seemed really confident on stage and polished and that's just a lot of practice, but I still get nervous as well. But I think there's a progression there of I tell a story about, being called on in class and just not wanting to even answer a question despite, being a high achieving student because I didn't want to speak in front of my peers. So that's like as a kid, as a high schooler. I talk about getting to the Thunderbirds, which I'm in my 30s at that point, early 30s, and I'm an accomplished F-16 pilot. I'm an instructor. I've done a lot. I'm like found my footing in that career field. And I get to the Thunderbirds and I'm learning these objectively dangerous maneuvers. And we do public affairs training. And they take us over to the wing public affairs officer, an airman who's like in his early 20s, puts us in front of a camera and has us do a practice interview. And he asked us questions. And I remember getting dry mouth and sweaty hands and just stumbling through my answers and just sounding stupid, honestly. Like, if people come to the air show this weekend, what are they going to see? And I literally am like, airplanes?
Right.
Okay, we're gonna need you to say more than that.
Yeah.
Um, and I just remember being so nervous for that, and no one was watching. That
Right.
wasn't that
Just
recording
a
wasn't
camera.
going anywhere,
Just a little camera. Yeah.
right? And then throughout the next 3 years, I do countless plane side interviews for local TV stations, planes in the background, jets in the background after we land, camera, microphone. You kind of know the questions that they're generally going to ask, but you never know for sure. They can always throw you a
Never.
curveball.
There's always a dinger. Yep.
So you do those and you do school visits where you get on stage and talk to high schoolers. And I would still get super nervous before those, even though I'm in a blue suit. These kids think we're awesome. We
Right.
literally could get up there, play a video, and be like, cool jets, questions.
Yeah. Right.
And they would be
Right.
like, cool, awesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
but I think it's such a good example because they see this, polished keynote speaker getting paid to do that. And a lot of people are like, oh, there's people like that do that kind of thing. And then there's people like me that aren't equipped to do that. And I like to tell that story because I'm like, no, you can become whatever you want that finished product to be. It just takes effort and intention to put yourself into a growth mode where you're doing things that are new and uncomfortable and you feel stretched and you're scared and you're nervous. That's the only way to get there. You just got to have the courage to start doing it.
Well, it's just like this. So the first time you work out, you're lifting weights, it's hard, it hurts, you get sore the next day. None of it's comfortable. I mean, the first time you do, you know, any type of jump on the floor, stand up real quick, jump on the floor, take the ropes and do the alternating ropes. And then any type of anything that you do that is physical and new and challenging is uncomfortable. But look at what growth comes from being uncomfortable. And
Yep.
that's the thing for me. I've done 300 podcasts in the past year and a half. The
Wow.
first one was, what is he going to ask me and how am I going to answer this question, and am I going to sound like an idiot, and what if I freeze, and I've done 1,000 sales meetings in my lifetime before that. So why this would be nerve-wracking, I don't know. I mean, even getting on Fox News and Tucker Carlson and Fox and Friends and all those things that I've done, yeah, you still get a little nervous when you walk out there. But if you know your craft, if you know what you're if you're confident in the area of what you're going to speak, then that typically overcomes that. But I do think that the point that needs to be made, everybody needs to hear, is that if you want to grow in any way, shape, or form in anything, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yep.
And the people that stay in their comfort zone never really get to explore or experience the beauty of what you have, whether it was signing those amazing autographs or telling a story or having that 6-year-old look at you and go, oh my God, I think my world is much bigger now because of that, right?
For sure. And I think so many people feel this kind of unease because they feel kind of stuck and they know they have unfulfilled potential. But the only way to really feel that fulfillment and like you are living your life to the full capacity or to the fullest or however you want to say it is to keep pushing yourself all the time, to keep learning, to keep being uncomfortable. And I don't think that has to be this terrifying, monumental leap of faith that you make. It can be the tiniest thing, right? It can be literally walking in, if you want to use like working out, because I'm a big fitness person as well. It can literally be walking into the gym and then just walking on a treadmill so you can like observe how things work in this environment that you're not familiar with. And then the
Sure.
next day, maybe you walk into the gym, you walk on the treadmill, and you try one weight machine that you watched someone else use last time. So you kind of have an idea. And you fast forward a year later and you're in way better shape. You feel comfortable in that environment. You've made friends there. And it's like what you do.
And not only that, but you're going to see the next person who walks into a gym in some hotel in some city they're unfamiliar with, and they're looking over at you, and you're like, "Oh, I remember her. That used to be me, right? I
Yep.
remember how she's feeling." And chances are, you might go up and interact with that person and help them a little bit. So the the um the progression now, highly acclaimed speaker. I don't want to, you don't need me to say that I'm proud of you for that, but I just can't, it's so cool to see the again, the progression from where you were to what you're doing.
Yep.
I just love the fact that you've come this far. And you've written a couple of children's
Yeah.
books. One of them is Upside Down Dreams, and one of them is What's Your Call Sign? What was the purpose? I realize they're for children, but what was the purpose of beginning with a children's book?
Yeah. So again, I feel like there was a lot of these that have happened to me that I paid attention to. I had a moment of inspiration where I had no aspirations to become an author or children's author or anything. But 2019, first year on the Thunderbirds, we went to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. We did an event there. Afterwards, we had some time to walk around. I went into the bookstore, which for anyone that's been is super cool. It's all kinds of space stuff, aviation stuff, lots of stuff for kids. I was looking at the children's books and, kind of having been in that job for a few months and just seeing how impactful it was for little girls to see a woman flying for the Thunderbirds, like just having that one on one interaction again and again. I was looking at these children's books and I realized that there weren't really any with female protagonists that the kid would find relatable.
Right.
There were historical ones, of course, Amelia Earhart being one of the biggest figures in aviation history.
Sure.
But I think it's hard for, again, those little 6, 7 year old kids to look at Amelia Earhart and feel relatable. So I was like, I want to write a children's book about a little girl that's that age that wants to be a fighter pilot. So decided in that moment, standing in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Again, just what I do, I'm like, now I'm going to actually execute. It took It took a lot of trial and error. I was not familiar with the publishing world. I did not realize how hard it is to break into. Like most
There
of that
is.
world doesn't even know what the Thunderbirds are, I would say.
Yeah.
So I'm like, hello, I have this manuscript I've written. I don't have an illustrator. I pitched myself to all the biggest literary agents for children's books. No one responds to me, or if they do, it's like a
Oh, yeah.
default no.
I know that feeling really well.
Yep. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be harder than being like, hey, I have this cool job. Listen, because
Yeah.
they're like, cool, we don't care. I don't
Yeah.
know what that job is.
And the book writing is way easier than the rest of it, isn't it? I mean, I
Yes, 100%.
first time.
Especially a kid's book that's like 700 words.
Right.
Um, so I'm like, all right, we'll set that aside. I'm busy flying air shows. Turns out the schedule is quite intense. And then I'm leaving to do what I do now, and I'm starting to get more active on LinkedIn. And I'm, telling my little stories in my posts and sharing videos and photos and kind of starting to grow an audience on LinkedIn, which was a platform I think I had a profile on, but I wasn't active on at all. Someone reached out and asked if I ever thought about writing a book. And she was a ghostwriter, and she's like, I would love to work with you on like a memoir or a self-help book or something like that.
Sure.
I was like, well, I'm not ready to do that, but I have this children's book manuscript that I wrote 2 years ago.
Right.
Turns out she's also a children's author. She introduced me to her publisher.
Wow.
They're a smaller publisher, but they've been amazing to work with, and signed a contract within a few weeks. And Upside Down Dreams was born. What's Your Call Sign's a spinoff from that. But the whole premise of the book, the whole goal was to give kids that wouldn't have that one-on-one interaction that I personally got to experience so many times, like to give them that same level of hope and inspiration just through the story. And so it's been a, a passion project for sure, but it's been really fun and rewarding to see it get into kids' hands.
Beautiful. Well, again, cool books. It's again, if you have little kids, you need to open up their world to whatever is possible. And these are two ways to do it with Upside Down Dreams and What's Your Call Sign, again, by Michelle Mace Curran. So I am supposed to get my call sign next year. I've been
Yeah.
through the ringer with these guys. Trust me, I've downed more than a bottle of aspirin or two after spending a night with these guys in the process of getting my name. And so I can't let you go without giving me at least a little bit about how you got Mace as your call sign.
I knew you would ask about this for sure. And I am excited. You're gonna have to follow up and let me know what your call sign is, because
I
it
definitely
is,
will, for sure.
I feel like it's one of those experiences that is kind of stressful because you're like, "Oh, everyone's gonna call me this from here on out."
I
And like
know, I know.
for me, I got named 4 months into my very first assignment, and I obviously still go by it today. So there's a lot of pressure there, but it's also a rite of passage and kind of the sign of acceptance as you're like one of the crew now.
Sure.
Um, so MACE is an acronym, but our traditionally we share the full story of how we got our call sign in person over a beverage. I think that's a ploy just to get free beer, honestly. But I've been stopped in the airport several times at this point by people that have seen me talk about on social media, and they're like, do I have to buy you a drink? Tell me. And I'm like, no, I'll just tell you, like, we're in person. So if you see me in person, I will 100% tell you. If I get on a stage, I tell the whole story in detail of how I earned it. But I give the cliff notes for things like this because I like to leave a little bit of mystery.
Yeah, let's
But
do it.
basically,
Just give me a smidgen. I don't need all
yeah,
of
dogfighting, reference what I've, kind of told you about that. Dogfighting, brand new lieutenant, first assignment, really just young and green and inexperienced. Accidentally went supersonic, and the jet was going super fast then, which means when I rolled and pulled back on the stick, I pulled a ton of G's for a really long time, almost G locked, did not win the fight because I was going so fast I couldn't point at the other airplane because my turn was ginormous. So it was a tactical execution error. That's actually fairly common, but it also earned me my call sign. So it's always fun to have people try to guess what the acronym stands for based on that. A lot of people thought I had either pepper sprayed someone
Uh,
or that
or
like
you
it's
got
a
pepper sprayed.
right, I guess that as well, or it's a medieval weapon, a mace. So
Right.
they're like, did you beat someone up? Like, does this have a reference to your big biceps? Because I like to work
Right.
out. What is it? So it's fun to let the lore continue. But more and more people know as I give speeches, and eventually it'll be common knowledge. But that's what I'll say for today.
Well, I hope where are you at? What town am I calling right now?
I'm in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Okay. I hope that our paths cross at some point because I would like to have I would like to have the beer just to have the beer with you for
For
sure,
sure.
and to thank you for your service to our country, obviously. And then you'll tell me the story, and I will tell you exactly how I got mine as well.
For sure. That'll be bring this moment full circle.
Yeah, perfect. So again, thank you so much for being with me today. Your story is amazing. I couldn't wait. I probably have 20 more questions I never got to, but we were already at an hour, and this has been just so wonderful. Where can people find you? Because they should find you, and they should make themselves aware of what you've done, and maybe even avail themselves of your service or whatever. So where do they find you at?
I am all over the internet. I'm too findable sometimes. My website is just macecurran.com, just call sign last name, and that's got info on speaking. There's forms that you can fill out to contact my business there, and I see all of those. Instagram is just at mace_curran.
Okay.
And then if people are on LinkedIn, I put out a ton of content about, teamwork and growth and trust and just a lot of personal development stuff that really resonates in the business world. And that's just Michelle Mason quotes Curran on LinkedIn. So
Michelle
very,
Mace in quotes, Curran. Okay.
yep, yep,
Curran.
exactly.
Perfect. And I know you have a personal development thing that you can't talk about yet, but we will
Yep.
talk again.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
And
say. I'll be back.
when that comes out, let's make sure we have this conversation again. And I have a new book coming out myself, so I'm excited about that. And I think those will probably align right about the same time. So hopefully
Nice.
we'll get to see you again and have another conversation and make that happen.
Absolutely. I would love that. This has been fun. I look forward to the next one. Good luck with the call sign.
Yes, thank you very much. Michelle Mace Curran. Been a pleasure having you. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks.